Homeschooling does not have to look like you're replicating a classroom. As a matter of fact, it's probably best if it doesn't because we're at home. This is video number 4 of our 5-part mini-series on Homeschooling 101, Crash Course in Homeschooling. How do you start homeschooling? In this video, we are going to discuss 8 major educational philosophies that you could do for homeschooling, as well as how do you set up routine, rhythms, and structure in your home. So let's get started. When we started homeschooling, I literally thought all homeschoolers did was traditional school at home. And what I found very quickly is that it caused a mutiny with my kids. What I've discovered is I was not alone in that. That's a very typical response for most children because they're at home. And then when you try to bring school into your home, kids don't like that very much. Now, some kids like it. Some kids like this doing school at home philosophy. But most kids I've found as I've talked to hundreds of parents over the last 4.5 years since we've been homeschooling, most kids don't like it and they don't do very well. I want to share with you the 8 major philosophies that homeschoolers look to. Now, there are other philosophies. We're not going to touch on forest schooling. We're not going to touch on Wild and Free or Thomas Jefferson Education or Amelia Reggio, and there's a myriad of others. But fabulous philosophies, but those aren't really considered major philosophies in the homeschooling world. So we're going to touch on the 8 major ones. Okay, philosophy number 1 is traditional school at home. So school at home mimics the structure of traditional schooling. You've got textbooks and workbooks and curriculums. You have a schedule, and often it uses box curricula that you can purchase. When I started homeschooling, that's what I thought homeschooling looked like, that we would literally replicate the classroom at home. And that is a philosophy you can follow. But as I mentioned before, most kids don't like it because it becomes very rigid. When we first started homeschooling, I had a strict schedule where I was like, from 8 a.m. to 8:45 a.m., we're going to work on language arts. And from 8:45 to 9 o'clock, we're going to have a 15-minute break. And what I found is it was very, very restrictive for my family. Now, there are families that do like that much structure, but I found for me, it was very, very suffocating. And I had been a middle school teacher, and I still found it intensely difficult and suffocating. And my kids also found it suffocating. So that's the first educational philosophy most people think of who are not in the homeschooling world, is the traditional school at home. Like I said, you get boxed curricula and you go to town with a set schedule and you do all the things. And you have tests and workbooks and all that. That's one philosophy. The second philosophy is the classical philosophy. Some of the major tenets of the classical philosophy is based on the trivium, which divides learning into 3 stages. The first stage is grammar, which is facts and memorization. The second stage is logic or reasoning and analysis. And then the third phase is rhetoric, which includes expression and debate. In the classical philosophy, the emphasis is on history, literature, and philosophy. There's heavy focus on reading, writing, and often critical thinking. Latin and classical languages are also often included. And it uses Socratic discussion and original sources. So kids read a lot of the original source documents as part of the classical philosophy. Now, in my opinion, other than the school at home philosophy, this is one of the strictest of the homeschooling philosophies. And there's even all throughout the country, there are classical conversations, which are groups you can join to facilitate in the learning, and a lot of people, instead of going to other enrichment programs, they choose to do classical conversations. When I first started homeschooling, one of the first books that I read was a book about the classical philosophy. And like I said, for me, it was really restrictive, much like the traditional school at home method. My kids, I tried implementing some things with my kids and it just didn't fly very well. But those who do the classical philosophy and do it well really, really love that philosophy. So if you tend to be a lot more like you love a lot of structure, classical might be a great option for your family. Okay, the third philosophy is the Charlotte Mason philosophy. Charlotte Mason was an educator in the 19th century, late 19th century. Some major tenets of the Charlotte Mason philosophy include literature, a literature-based approach, which is focusing on living books rather than textbooks. She believes in doing really short lessons, that children's attention span was short, and so you want to do short little lessons and then focus on nature study and then do narration, dictation, and copy work. A lot of people do the Charlotte Mason philosophy. I find with all of the philosophies, I find beauty in all of them. And even with the classical philosophy, like I have a son studying rhetoric and logic right now, which is very classical. But the other aspects that he does are different. With Charlotte Mason, I love how she would teach writing with narration, dictation, and copy work. But her whole thing was like that children are born with their own personalities, with their whole persons when they're born. And you want to be able to educate the whole child. And so they emphasize high quality, really good literature. They call them living books. They use, again, narration, dictation, and copy work to teach writing, which is literally like copying out of really good books, verbatim, that children learn by literally copying out of good books. As they start to write, they start to see the sentence structure. As they narrate back, they learn how to tell the story. And then dictation is when they listen as you read and they write down what you've read to them. And she believed that through this way, they learn proper writing by example, by looking and listening to good living books and good literature. She also encouraged a lot of outdoor exploration and nature journaling, where you take a journal and you draw things from nature and then you write down observations of the things from nature and you measure it. And so that's nature journaling. And then she emphasized heavily on developing good attitudes and good character and having a strong moral compass. So there's a lot of beautiful, beautiful things in the Charlotte Mason philosophy. That's not as strict as the others, but there is definitely more of a rhythm to Charlotte Mason. Same with classical. It tends to be a little bit stricter. But again, with every philosophy, you've got to figure out what works best for your family. Okay, next philosophy is Montessori, which most of you probably have heard of Maria Montessori. Montessori focuses on that it's child-centered, it's a hands-on approach with a focus on independence, practical life skills, and learning through exploration. It's very self-directed, real-world experience, multi-age groupings to encourage peer learning, and then really have an emphasis on life skills and sensory experiences with touch and things being tactile. With this philosophy, it's a prepared environment with very, very, very structured choices. Now, I am not an expert in all of these philosophies by any stretch. This is just a taste of each philosophy. So if you want to learn more, I have included in the show notes links to resources if you want to learn more about any of the philosophies. And those books are by experts in each of the philosophies. Okay, next philosophy is Waldorf, which is funny because as a child, I went to a Waldorf camp. The Waldorf philosophy emphasizes a holistic approach to integrating the arts, music, storytelling, and movement, and it actually delays formal academics until a little bit later for children. The focus is really on creativity, imagination, and the arts. It's very hands-on, very experiential learning and storytelling, a lot of play. Strong daily rhythms with natural materials. Montessori and Waldorf are similar in that way, like everything's wooden and natural and organic and, linens and silks and everything is tactily feels good to the skin. Also, there's a limit on screen time and a huge limit on formal academics in the early years. Okay, so that's Waldorf. The next philosophy is probably the most controversial philosophy, but I think it's also the most misunderstood philosophy, and you probably heard of it. It's called unschooling. Unschooling is also, which is actually, unschooling is a terrible name for this philosophy. I kind of feel like it was misnamed, like, because really what it is child-led learning, without necessarily a set curriculum, but life experiences are the primary teachers. Now, with unschooling, again, the focus is on what are the child's natural inclinations and what are the things they want to learn about. And as a parent, you then provide the resources for the child to learn that thing. And as the child loses interest in that thing, then you move on to the next thing that they're interested in. But it's definitely more controversial because sometimes people go, "Oh, I met some unschoolers once, and they let their children do whatever they wanted, and they never had boundaries, and they were unschoolers, and their children couldn't read, they couldn't do it, And really, those aren't unschoolers; those are like not schoolers, like they're just not schooling or being parents. But unschooling doesn't mean that you're not parenting, and it doesn't mean that you're not providing resources for the children. In some ways, I feel like it is a little bit more hands-on because a parent has to be very active about knowing what their children are interested in and then finding the resources for the child to learn those things, whatever they might be. Again, parents are the facilitators in learning rather than just the teachers, and it respects the child's natural development. Okay, so that's unschooling. The next philosophy is unit studies, which is almost a pedagogy too. Unit studies is more of a thematic approach where multiple subjects are integrated into like a single topic of study. I remember when I was teaching middle school, I was a theater arts teacher in middle school, and we were going to be doing A Christmas Carol. And I had this idea, and I went to my department chair and I was like, why isn't education more integrated? And he's like, what do you mean? And I said, well, here we want to do A Christmas Carol as a play. And I want the kids to do set design and costume design. I want them to understand the history of what was going on with Charles Dickens during the Victorian era. I wish we could get the math teacher involved, and a lot of these kids that are going to be doing the play are in pre-algebra, and I would love to be able to take the stage and have the kids figure out the measurements if they were to have to do a scale model of the stage, which would take math. And I'd love to talk with the history teacher about like the Victorian history, and could we all get together and do a whole study where it's an integrated study using A Christmas Carol as the foundation. And he's like, and herein lies the problem with education today. And he's like, I wish we could do that. But the core teachers, they can't. They don't have the freedom to be able to adjust their whole schedule, and they've got the standardized testings that they have to prepare for. And I talked to a couple of the teachers. I talked to the language arts teacher and I talked to the history teacher for the 8th graders, and they were like, we wish we could, but there's no way that we could do it because we have to prepare them for the standardized tests, and we have all of these state standards that we're expected to get through. But ideally, it would be amazing if we could do that. And so I got shot down, which I understood why, because the education system was purposefully created to compartmentalize and to put subjects in silos. That was done very intentionally, whereas that's not how the world works. With unit studies, it's an integration. You choose a theme such as ancient Egypt or the American Revolution, and then you study it across all the subjects. As I mentioned with A Christmas Carol, we might say, okay, we're gonna study about Victorian England for history, and learn some geography with England. And then we're also going to learn about, what inventions were going on in Victorian England during A Christmas Carol, and what were some of the other authors going on, who were writing during Charles Dickens's time. And so it's very hands-on, very project-based, lots of experiments, real-world experiences, and it encourages deep exploration into a single topic, rather than covering broad like we do with most education. And it's great for multi-age homeschooling. So if you've got lots of kids and you're like, oh, what are we going to do? Choose a unit study and then have different projects for the different ages, but you're studying the same topic, right? So that's called unit studies. Okay, and then the last philosophy I want to talk to you about is the philosophy that most people follow. And that is the eclectic style, or the eclectic philosophy. Eclectic homeschooling, all that means is like you pull from different philosophies, you mix, it's kind of a mix and match approach that combines elements of all different homeschooling philosophies based on your child's needs, based on your capabilities. Most homeschoolers are this. Like I am considered an eclectic unschooler. I do a lot of child-led learning, but I do expect my kids to know how to read, write, and do math. And so I do use a math curriculum online, but then I use various rich literature based in history, and we use that for history. And I use the Charlotte Mason approach to writing with narration, dictation, and copy work. And so I'm eclectic in that way. And then the rest of the day, they work on the subjects that they're most interested in. So I have a child who loves the piano. So he'll he'll finish his main subjects that I want him to work on. Also civics and government. That's another one that I feel like my kids should know. They need to know American history and civics and government. Like, we need to nail that in, that they understand Constitution. But then beyond that, like, he'll spend hours on the piano. Or I have another child who's very into business. And so the bulk of his coursework as a senior this year has been studying the top business books, the top psychology books, and then interning with various organizations and companies, because that's what he wants to learn. And so that's the eclectic approach, is you pull from multiple philosophies. You're not a purist in one philosophy. You kind of do what works. You might use a curriculum here, but you don't use a curriculum there. That's the eclectic approach. And like I said, most people follow the eclectic philosophy that I know. Now, the other thing is, when you're homeschooling, you don't have to have a rigid schedule. It's okay to be more relaxed, right? We do have structure in our home. Like, my children have expectations. They get up, they have their list of things that they need to do, and they have an expected time period to do it in. I'm not hard and fast about, like, you have to spend an hour on math. Once they finish their math lesson for the day, then they're done. And if I see, like with my 9-year-old, if it's taking longer than 15 minutes for her to do her math lesson and she's getting frustrated, I'll work with her on it. And then if she's still frustrated, we'll put it away, right? Really, the rule of thumb is, for each child's age, the time that you want to work on a lesson would be their age plus 1. So for my 9-year-old, 10 minutes is really sufficient. Now, there's sometimes that she really loves the subject that we're talking about and she wants to keep going. When we do read alouds, where you read to your children, which is a thing that everyone in the homeschooling world does, and it's kind of amazing, even into teenage years, that I'll start reading and my kids want me to keep reading. Or if we're listening to an audiobook, they will draw, they'll do something else. And oftentimes they're like, wait, don't turn it off yet. We're getting into a good part in the story. And so if the kids are really enjoying it, then yeah, keep going. But it's important to set up like structure and have rhythms, but it doesn't need to have, you don't need to have a strict schedule. And that's something that I had to adjust to, because I was used to a strict school schedule. From this time to this time, we do this. From this time to this time, we do this. It doesn't have to be that way. You can have like, okay, in the mornings, every morning, we're going to have family time where we're going to spend 15 minutes and we're going to maybe sing a song, say a prayer. If you're religious, we are. So we might read scripture, and then we'll have breakfast and have read aloud, and then go about dividing up into, this child is working on their math. Well, I'm helping this child with their reading and writing and their personal reading. And then the expectation is they don't get to do anything fun until they've finished their work and their chores, and then we have lunch. And then in the afternoon, they have time to work on the things that they want to work on. Sometimes they get things done. I have one child that gets things done super duper fast. Like, he will knock out his lessons and he does really well on them. Like, he'll get on there. He's 12. He gets in there. He gets his math done. And the kid's in geometry, y'all, and he's 12. He'll get in, knock his math out. He does like math. Sometimes he'll take longer on math because he's like, oh, I wanted to do a few lessons, not just one. And it's totally okay to move forward, or if you need to slow down with the child, that's okay. One of the things that you're doing is also learning your child's learning style, because all children learn differently. And so it's important that you take that time with your kids to discover, like, where are their strengths and where are the things that they struggle with. And if you need to move forward, if you are using a curriculum, it's okay to move forward and move ahead if the child is doing really well and wants to. And it's okay to slow down if a child's struggling with certain concepts. That's totally acceptable. You get to structure your homeschool the way that best meets the rhythms, the natural rhythms of your family. And that's okay. I know one family where the mom works in the morning, so the kids get the free time in the morning to work on their chores and then hang out or play, because she's got a lot of littles where they can play. And then once 1 o'clock hits, she works from home. And then once 1 o'clock hits, she's with them and they're working on the various lessons, and she's an eclectic homeschooler as well. And so she pulls from various resources, and then that they spend the afternoon working on their studies, because that's what works for their family. So you have to find what rhythms work for your family. And children do need some structure. As adults, we need some structure, right? There's nothing worse than going into a place that's total chaos, right? So it's important that you structure it how it best fits. Maybe you set parameters and you're like, from 10 to noon is when we do our studies, and you're expected to get your studies done during that 2-hour period. Or maybe it's in the morning, this is our family time, and then we're going to do this, and then we'll take a break, and then you'll have the afternoon. Like, you decide what that looks like, set the parameters, give them parameters to work within, and then allow yourself the freedom to work within those parameters. So with that, those are the 8 major philosophies. If you want to learn more, look below. Our next video, our next episode, we will be discussing finding community so that your kids are not unsocialized. We'll see you in the next video. You got this. You're doing better than you think you are.